She walked into the bar on a Tuesday night, and the room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before the laughter started. The scar ran from her left temple to the corner of her jaw, pale and uneven, the kind of mark that doesn't come from an accident. Her sleeves were long despite the Arizona heat, buttoned at the wrist. She was 29 years old, 5'4", and she ordered water. That's when Corporal Ethan Cole leaned over to his buddy and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "What happened to her face?" He had no idea. None of them did. The woman they were laughing at had once crawled through burning wreckage to pull men twice her size out of a fire that should have killed everyone inside. The scars they were mocking were the reason 12 of the most elite soldiers in the United States military were still breathing, and every single one of those men was about to walk through that door. If this story grabs you from the first minute, follow along with me until the very end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bar was called The Anchor, which was either clever or lazy depending on how many drinks you'd had. It sat at the edge of a strip mall on the south side of Phoenix, wedged between a laundromat and a tire shop, and it smelled like stale beer and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from spending too many nights in the same place with the same people. The sign outside had a busted A in Anchor, so it technically read The Enshore, and nobody had bothered to fix it in 3 years. Emily Carter had never been inside before. She'd driven past it twice on her way home from Harbor Ridge Medical Center, noticed the half-dead neon sign, and thought nothing of it. But that Tuesday night, her shift had run 4 hours over schedule. She'd been on her feet since 5 in the morning, and the thought of going back to her apartment to eat cereal over the sink and stare at the wall felt like its own kind of punishment. So she stopped. She parked her 10-year-old Civic in the lot, sat for a moment with the engine off, and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The scar was always worse under fluorescent light, but the amber glow from the Anchor's windows softened it slightly. Her hair was pulled back, she'd had it tied since before sunrise, and the collar of her scrub top was wrinkled from where she'd been hunched over a patient's bed in the ICU for the better part of an hour. She didn't fix either thing. She got out and went inside. The bar held maybe 40 people on a packed night. Tonight it had about 25, and a solid third of them were military. Marines, she could tell from the bearing and the haircuts and the way they arranged themselves even at rest, backs to walls, facing the room. There were 2 pool tables in the back, both in use. A television mounted above the bar was showing a baseball game nobody was watching. Country music played low from a speaker that had seen better days. Emily took a stool at the far end of the bar, away from the clusters of people. The bartender, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a short gray beard, came over without being waved down. "What can I get you?" "Water, please, and maybe a menu if you have one." He put a laminated card in front of her. She looked at it without really seeing it. Her hands were resting on the bar, and she noticed the way the man's eyes moved to her wrists before flicking back up. Not rude about it, just a fraction of a second, the involuntary kind of noticing. She was used to it. She'd been used to it for 6 years. She ordered a burger and a side of fries, put the menu back, and stared at the baseball game she also wasn't watching. The laughter reached her about 7 minutes in. It wasn't the laughter itself. Bars were loud. People laughed. It was the specific frequency of it. The kind that comes with eye contact, where 2 people look at a third person and then look at each other. Emily had grown up as the kind of kid who learned to recognize that sound early. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a slow drink of her water and let the conversation wash over her, waiting to see if it would pass. It didn't. "I'm just saying," a male voice said, not bothering to lower itself. "She's got to know people are going to stare, right? Walking in like that." "Cole," a second voice, quieter, warning. "What? I'm not being mean. I'm just saying." Emily set her glass down. She turned around slowly, the way she turned to face things, like she'd already assessed the room and found nothing in it particularly surprising. There were 4 of them at a table maybe 15 feet away. All male, all Marine young, the kind of 23 that still thinks being loud in public is a personality. The one called Cole was broad across the shoulders with a jaw that looked like it had been squared off with a carpenter's tool, and he was looking at her with the particular expression of someone who thinks he's being entertained, not cruel. She held his gaze for a moment, then she turned back to the bar. "See?" She heard me. Cole's voice again. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter from his table. Doesn't say anything, just takes it. The bartender set her burger down and leaned slightly forward over the bar. Want me to say something to them? No. Emily picked up the burger. It's fine. It's not fine, he said, but he straightened up and let it go because she'd already turned back to her food and made it clear the conversation was over. She ate. She tried to taste the food, but mostly she was running a post-shift internal count. The patient in Bay 4 who'd been deteriorating since noon, the attending who'd left orders that were wrong and she'd had to push back on twice, the IV line she'd replaced at 7 p.m. that was already showing signs of infiltration when she left. The mental checklist didn't stop just because she was off the clock. They never really did. She was 3/4 through the burger when she heard the chair scrape back. Cole was coming toward her. She put the burger down. He came and leaned against the bar beside her, the way men do when they want to be in your space without technically approaching you. He smelled like beer. 2 or 3 of them, she gauged, which meant his judgment was softened, but he wasn't sloppy. And he had a smile that probably worked in most situations. Sorry if we were being loud, he said. He didn't sound sorry. Rough night? I'm fine. She reached for her water. What happened? He nodded toward her face, not subtle about it, almost theatrical, like he was pointing it out to the room rather than asking her directly. Emily's jaw tightened a fraction. Long time ago. Military? There was something in how he asked it. Not respectful curiosity, more like challenge. Like he was deciding whether to let her claim that. I work at Harbor Ridge. Huh. He leaned on the bar with his forearm, angling his body toward her. So what, you were a nurse over there, pushing meds and IV bags? She didn't answer. No offense, he said, in the way people say things they absolutely intend. Those scars look like they came from something serious. I was wondering if it was actually serious or if it was like a kitchen fire, something like that. Her hands were in her lap now. She was looking at the baseball game. Because the way you're sitting over here alone, Cole continued, his voice dropping slightly, almost conversational, kind of looks like someone who got hurt and is still, dealing with it. Ethan, one of his friends, had gotten up. He was taller, broader, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Come on, man. I'm having a conversation. You're being an ass. Cole turned back to Emily. He thinks I'm being an ass. I think I'm just being honest. There's a difference. He reached out and touched her left wrist. It was a light touch. 2 fingers, not gripping, just resting. And it wasn't violent, but it was presumptuous in a way that was worse than violence, the particular kind of entitlement that assumes the right to access someone else's body for the sake of its own curiosity. Emily went very still. It was the kind of still that people who'd never been in combat wouldn't recognize. But it wasn't the stillness of someone who was frightened or embarrassed or about to cry. It was the stillness of someone who had, in a specific and practiced part of their brain, just assessed and cataloged the nearest exit, the weight of the man in front of her, the positions of every other person in the room, and made a decision. The decision was, not here, not tonight, not worth it. She looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at his face. You should move that, she said. Her voice was flat. No tremble, no heat, just information. Cole pulled his hand back, but his smile didn't move. See, that's what I mean. You've got this, he gestured at her face, her arms, the whole of her, thing going on, and it makes you seem fragile, right? But then you talk and you sound like what? Like someone trying really hard to seem tougher than they are. The room had gone partially quiet. Not all the way. There was still music, still the click of pool balls from the back, but the conversations nearest to them had slowed and heads had turned. Emily looked at him for 3 full seconds without blinking. Then she turned back to the bar, pulled out her wallet, and laid down enough cash to cover the food and a tip. You're leaving? Cole said. She stood up from the stool. You know what your problem is? His voice had shifted slightly now, a little defensive, a little louder, the sound of a man who'd expected a different reaction and wasn't adjusting well. You can't take a joke. You come into a place like this, looking like that, and you expect everyone to just... Ethan, the taller friend again, harder this time. Enough. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Emily picked up her jacket from the back of the stool. She was about to turn for the door when the sound came. Not the door opening. That was too quiet. What she heard first was the gravel shift in the parking lot through the thin walls, the specific sound of multiple car doors in sequence, and then the deliberate quality of the silence that followed. The kind of silence that comes before a group of people who know how to move quietly enter a space. The door opened. 12 men walked in. They came through in twos and threes, and the room accommodated them the way a crowd accommodates a weather system. Not out of politeness, but out of instinct. They ranged from mid-30s to late 40s, and none of them looked like the kind of men who'd gotten soft in whatever years they'd spent out of service. They moved without discussing where to stand. They didn't clump. They distributed across the room like they were clearing it. The one at the front was 6'2" and built like someone had assembled him for a purpose. His hair was close-cropped and shot through with early gray at the temples, and there was a scar above his left eyebrow that had been there long enough to go silver. He had the kind of face that wasn't handsome exactly, but was deeply, unmistakably competent. His name was Marcus Hayes, though the people who'd served with him had called him Bull for the better part of 15 years, and the name had followed him into civilian life the way some names do. Not as a nickname anymore, but as an identity. He walked to the center of the bar and stopped, and then he looked at Emily Carter. Not the way Cole had looked at her. Not with assessment or mockery or the slow, categorizing gaze of someone deciding what she was worth. He looked at her the way you look at something you've spent years looking for, with a quality that had relief in it and something quieter underneath that. Emily went still again. Different kind of still this time. She recognized him. You don't forget the faces of people you've pulled out of burning metal in the dark. And you don't forget the face of the man who was screaming the name of his injured operator even while his own leg was compromised, and he was 3 minutes from going into shock. She'd had her hands on his femoral artery in a burning aircraft fuselage while the frame around them was groaning and a secondary fire was building 20 feet to her left. She'd told him to shut up and stay conscious, and he'd obeyed her, which was the most useful thing he'd ever done for her. She hadn't seen his face since. Bull Hayes crossed the bar. He stopped in front of her. Behind him, his 11 men had arranged themselves with quiet efficiency, and the entire room was watching now. The pool game had stopped, conversations had died, even the baseball game seemed to recede. Cole was still standing at the bar. He looked at the 12 men, looked at Emily, and something in his expression shifted for the first time. "Emily Carter," Bull said. His voice was low and even, and it carried anyway. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume to reach people. "Marcus," she said. He looked at her for a moment, at her face, at her arms, at the scar he'd last seen as an open wound being wrapped in field dressing while the aircraft around them burned. His jaw moved slightly. "We've been looking for you for 2 years," he said. She didn't say anything to that. "You transferred out of the VA system, moved 3 times, changed your contact number." There was no accusation in it, just the recounting of a search. "I know." "You know why we're here?" Emily looked at the 11 men arranged behind him. Several of them she recognized. The angles of faces she'd seen in smoke and firelight, and in the particular frantic clarity that comes when everything is burning and time has collapsed into nothing but the next 60 seconds. They looked back at her with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't gratitude exactly, but something between the two that didn't have a civilian word for it. "I didn't want to be found," she said. "Yeah," Bull said. "I figured." He glanced around the bar. His gaze landed on Cole, who was still standing there, caught somewhere between wanting to back away and not quite being able to make his legs do it. "There a problem here?" Bull asked. The question was directed at Cole, and it was the kind of question that wasn't really a question. Cole opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said finally. Bull looked at him for one more second, the kind of look that catalogs and files and moves on. Then he turned back to Emily. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Not here, if that's all right. There's something—" He paused, chose the word. "There's a situation." Emily looked at him. She picked up her jacket, which she'd never quite put down, and felt the familiar weight of the next sentence before she'd even decided to say it. "Buy me a coffee first." Bull almost smiled. It was less than a quarter inch of movement at the corner of his mouth, but for the men who knew him, it was the equivalent of a laugh. "Anywhere you want," he said. Behind him, Corporal Ethan Cole stood at the bar with his beer going warm in his hand, looking at the 12 men who had just walked into a roadside bar on a Tuesday night and addressed a scarred woman in scrubs like she was the most important person in the room. And for the first time that evening, he had no idea what to say. Emily buttoned the cuff of her left sleeve, a habit, not a self-consciousness. She'd been doing it since long before the scar was there, and walked toward the door. The 12 men moved around her, not escorting her, just naturally orienting in the way trained people orient when the person they've come to find has been found. She stepped out into the Phoenix night, the heat still sitting in the parking lot asphalt, even at 9:30, the stars faint above the light pollution. Bull came out behind her and fell into step a half-length back. He said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, "I know you didn't want to come back to any of this." "No," she said. "But there's a kid who's going to die by morning if we don't move." Emily stopped walking. She didn't turn around immediately. She stood in the parking lot with the sound of the bar's music bleeding through the wall behind her and the hum of the city and the dark flat stretch of the lot ahead of her, and she looked at her hands, at the scars across her palms that Cole had been looking at all night like they were wounds. She looked at them the way she always looked at them now, as a record of a decision she made in a burning aircraft that she still, 6 years later, hadn't decided whether she regretted. "Tell me about the kid," she said. Bull Hayes didn't answer her immediately. That was one of the things she remembered about him from the before. He was a man who thought before he spoke, which was rarer than it should have been in that world, where most people confuse speed with competence. He walked to the nearest car, a dark gray SUV parked under the only working light in the lot, and leaned against the hood. The other 11 men had filtered out behind them and distributed themselves with the same quiet efficiency they'd used inside. Some near the vehicles, some at the edges of the lot, nobody clustering. Old habit, maybe permanent habit. 8-year-old girl, Bull said, Mia Tran. She was hiking with her father in the Ridgeback Canyon system, about 40 miles northeast of here. Flash flood warning came in around 6 p.m. Father got her to a rock shelf about 60 feet above the canyon floor, managed to get a signal out before his phone died. He paused. Water's rising, rate it's moving. She's got maybe 4 to 5 hours before the shelf goes under. Emily absorbed this. Where's the father? Downstream, he fell trying to get back to her. Broken leg, possible concussion. Rescue team pulled him out an hour ago. He's at Ridgeback Valley Hospital. She's still up there. Why hasn't air rescue? Wind shear. Bull's jaw tightened slightly. There's a storm system sitting right on top of that canyon. Every pilot who's looked at the approach has refused the insertion. The canyon walls make it worse. They're funneling the gusts. 2 attempts already. Second crew got within 200 feet and had to abort. Emily turned this over. 40 miles northeast. Canyon flash flood. Night conditions. Wind shear. Water rising. A child on a rock shelf who was probably terrified and definitely cold and possibly injured and had been alone for going on 3 hours already. What does this have to do with me specifically? Bull looked at her. Because there's a third approach vector that the civilian pilots won't touch. It requires a technical rappel insertion from a fixed wing at canyon rim level, then a 200-foot descent on a moving rope to the shelf in conditions that are going to be actively trying to kill whoever goes down. He kept his voice even. The medic who goes in needs to be able to assess and stabilize a pediatric patient in flood conditions, manage a rope extraction under load in deteriorating weather, and keep themselves alive long enough to do all of that. There are people trained for that. The 2 SAR teams in range don't have anyone current on pediatric trauma and technical rope together. The third option was a military medic out of Fort Carver, but their bird went down for mechanical 40 minutes ago. He stopped. Let that land. I've got 12 men who will run every piece of that operation except the one thing it actually needs. Emily looked at the ground. The asphalt was still radiating the day's heat up through her shoes, and somewhere in the middle distance a car alarm was going off and stopping and going off again. I've been out of field rotation for 6 years, she said. I know. I'm a hospital nurse. I work in an ICU. I know that too. Marcus. She looked up at him. I'm not who I was. Bull was quiet for a moment. The parking lot light buzzed faintly overhead. There's a kid on a rock in the dark, he said. Water coming up. No one else can do the medical piece. Tell me you can't do it, and I'll spend the next 30 minutes trying to find someone who can before time runs out. But I need to hear you say it. She didn't say it. She stood in the parking lot for another 5 seconds, which was probably the most honest 5 seconds she'd spent with herself in years. No deflection, no patient charts to retreat into, no shift schedule to hide behind. Just the question of what she actually was versus what she'd been telling herself she was. Then she said, I need gear. They had gear. That should have surprised her, but didn't. The SUVs were packed with the kind of organized precision that came from people who planned missions for a living and never fully stopped, even after the missions were theoretically over. Within 4 minutes of her saying yes, she was going through a dry bag in the back of the second vehicle, while a compact man named Dario, she didn't know his last name, someone just said Dario's got the medical kit, laid out supplies on the SUV's tailgate under a headlamp. The kit was good. Better than she expected from something assembled on short notice. Pediatric airway supplies, trauma dressings, a SAM splint, hypothermia blankets. Someone had thought ahead. How long since you've done a technical descent? Asked a voice beside her. She looked up. The man was roughly her age, lean-framed with the kind of hands that told her he'd spent years on ropes. His name was Garrett, she learned later. But right now he was just a pair of competent hands checking her harness configuration and not being apologetic about the fact that he was double-checking her work. 6 years, she said, give or take. I'm going to run you through the brake system on this, he said. It's not what you're used to. Faster descent, more control in wind, but the handle placement is different. Show me. He showed her. She listened the way she'd trained herself to listen. Full attention, no ego, no pretending she already knew. She'd learned early that people died from assuming they knew things they'd slightly forgotten, and she had no interest in being one of those people. They were on the road in 11 minutes. The drive northeast was fast and mostly quiet. Emily was in the second vehicle with Garrett and 2 other men whose names she caught as Russo and Pemberton. Bull was in the lead car on the phone with the incident command team at the canyon rim, and she could occasionally hear the elevated pitch of the conversation without making out words. She spent the first 20 minutes going through the medical kit again, reordering it in the way that made sense to her hands. The things she'd need first at the top, the things she hoped she wouldn't need at the bottom. Garrett watched her do it without comment, which she appreciated. Russo, who was driving, said after a while, You worked Kelvin Ridge? She looked up. The aircraft recovery operation. 6 years ago, Haska Province. He said it carefully, not like he was testing her, but like he was making sure he had the right person. We weren't on that one, but we knew the team. Yeah, she said. 16 operators recovered. 14, she said. 2 didn't make it. 14 is 16 minus 2. 14 is 14, she said. You don't round up on that. Russo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Fair enough. She went back to the kit. Outside the windows, Phoenix's edge gave way to dark highway, and the highway gave way to the kind of emptiness that Arizona does at night. Vast and flat, and then suddenly not flat, the terrain buckling upward as they climbed toward the canyon country. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it reflexively. Harbor Ridge, the overnight charge nurse, probably wondering about a handoff note from the shift. She let it go to voicemail. She would deal with that later. She would deal with all of it later. The first thing she felt that wasn't just tactical calculation was when Pemberton, who hadn't said anything for the entire drive, leaned forward and put a bottle of water and a protein bar on the seat beside her without explanation. She hadn't eaten since the burger, most of which she'd abandoned. She hadn't registered that she was hungry until the water was in front of her. Thank you, she said. He nodded, went back to looking out the window. It was such a small thing. She wasn't sure why it hit her the way it did. The unsentimental practicality of it. The fact that he'd just noticed she needed something and addressed it without making a thing of it. It was how the good ones operated. She'd forgotten that there were still people who operated that way. She ate the protein bar and drank half the water and looked out at the dark desert and tried not to think about what she was driving toward. Awesome. The incident command post at Ridgeback Canyon's north rim was a loose arrangement of trucks, emergency lights, and taut-faced people who'd run out of good options before running out of time. There were 2 SAR vehicles, a fire department truck, and a state emergency management van with a generator humming beside it. The wind hit Emily when she stepped out of the SUV. Gusty, irregular, carrying cold moisture from the storm that was sitting on the canyon like a lid. A woman named Lieutenant Carver, compact and efficient, in an emergency management vest, met them at the rim. She looked at the 12 men and then at Emily with an expression that had moved past hope and was currently operating on something closer to desperation. "You're the medic?" "I'm a nurse." "Bull says you can do the technical insertion." "Bull says a lot of things," Emily said. "Show me the approach." Carver walked them to the rim. Emily looked down. The canyon was maybe 300 feet deep at this point, the wall's vertical granite shot through with ledges and cracks. In the daylight, it was probably striking. In the dark, with the emergency lights throwing hard shadows and the wind coming up the throat of it in unpredictable surges, it was something else. The sound of the water came up from below. Not the gentle sound of a stream, but the deep, percussive sound of a flooded canyon moving fast. She could see the shelf. It was maybe 60 feet above the current waterline, a granite ledge about 12 feet wide and 6 feet deep, and on it, visible in the wavering beam of a rescue spotlight from the opposite rim, was a small shape huddled against the canyon wall. Emily stared at that shape for a long time. "She's been there how long?" she asked. "Since approximately 6:15, Carver said. "It's 9:47 now." "Has she moved?" "Twice. We think she's awake. We've been trying to reach her on a megaphone, but the wind is taking the sound." "What's the water rate?" "Rising about 8 inches per hour. That shelf clears at approximately," Carver checked her phone, "1:40 a.m. Maybe earlier if the storm intensifies." Emily looked at Garrett. "What's our window for the descent?" "There's a lull pattern in the gusts," he said. "About 90 seconds between the bad ones, maybe 100. If we time the start of descent right and you move fast..." "How fast?" "Controlled speed, 200 feet, 90 seconds. You're going to be moving." "What's the extraction?" "We run a haul line from the rim. Once you've got her secured, we pull you both. That's going to take longer, 6, 8 minutes, depending on her condition and your combined weight." He paused. "The lull windows aren't going to hold for that. You'll be in open air during the haul when the gusts are running." "So we get hit on the way up?" "Probably, yeah." Emily was quiet. The wind came up the canyon again, hard enough to move her hair, carrying cold and the smell of wet stone and the deep sound of moving water. From across the canyon, the spotlight held steady on the small shape on the ledge. As Emily watched, the shape moved, shifted against the wall, drew its knees up, went still again. She was cold. She'd been alone in the dark for almost 4 hours, and she was 8 years old, and the water was coming, and she probably didn't understand why no one had come yet. Emily turned from the rim. "What's the anchor point?" Bull pointed to a bolted system that Garrett and Russo had already started rigging to a fixed outcrop 12 feet back from the edge. She walked to it, ran her hands over the hardware, checked the angles. "This is solid," she said. "We had time to do it right," Garrett said. She checked her harness again, her hands going through the points automatically, the way they'd gone through them hundreds of times in a life she'd tried to leave in a filing cabinet somewhere. Buckles, belay loop, gear loops, everything where it should be. The medical kit was rigged to her chest in a compact configuration that Dario had helped her sort out in the parking lot, weighted and balanced so it wouldn't swing. "How do you want to run comms?" Bull asked. "One earpiece. I need to be able to talk to you on the haul. If something goes wrong on the descent, I'll signal with the rope. 3 short pulls means abort. I'm coming back up. 2 long pulls means I'm on the ledge and stable." "Got it." "If I stop moving for more than 30 seconds on the descent and I haven't signaled..." "We haul you," Bull said. No argument. "No. If I stop moving, give me a minute before you haul. I might be managing a gust." Bull looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in it.
The same thing she'd seen in the parking lot, that quality of a man who had spent years leading people and knew the exact weight of sending someone into something dangerous. "Okay," he said. "A minute." Garrett handed her the descender device, and she spent 60 seconds with it again, not because she didn't remember the demonstration, but because the difference between remembering and knowing was 60 feet of open air and an 8-year-old's life. She worked the brake handle until the motion was in her hands, not in her head. "Lull windows coming in about 4 minutes, Russo said from the edge, watching something on his phone. A wind data feed, she realized. Someone had found a real-time instrument reading for the canyon. 4 minutes. Emily looked out at the canyon one more time. The spotlight across the rim was steady, and in its beam the small shape on the ledge hadn't moved in a while. She put the earpiece in. "Ready," she said. Garrett clipped her into the line. She walked backward to the rim, feeling the rope go taut and then settle into the familiar tension of loaded hardware, and she stood at the edge with the canyon dropping away below her and the wind in her face and the sound of the water rising up from the dark. Her hands were steady. She looked at them for a fraction of a second. The scarred palms, the marks across the knuckles, the particular landscape of a body that had been through something and come out the other side, not whole but still functional. Cole had looked at these hands and seen damage. What he couldn't have known, what almost nobody still in her life knew, was that these hands had held ephemeral bleed shut for 6 minutes in a burning aircraft, while the temperature around her climbed past the point where her sleeves caught fire. What he saw as disfigurement was actually load-bearing evidence of a choice. She'd made a choice. She was making another one now. "Window?" Russo said. 3, 2. Emily Carter stepped backward off the rim. The descent was fast, faster than she'd done in years, the device running smooth as Garrett had promised, and the canyon wall moved past her in the beam of her headlamp in slices of gray rock and shadow. The wind was present but manageable in the first 100 feet, and she focused on the brake handle and her speed and the ledge below her and nothing else. Then she hit the 70-foot mark. The gust came from the northwest, funneled by the canyon geometry, and it wasn't a push so much as a sudden absence of stability, like the air had reorganized itself without consulting her. She swung hard left, 12 feet of lateral movement in under a second, and her right shoulder connected with the canyon wall at a speed that was going to bruise deeply and might have cracked something she didn't have the luxury of acknowledging right now. She stabilized. Feet against the wall, brake hand locked, swinging rhythm back under control. "You okay?" Bull's voice in her ear. "Moving," she said. She didn't stop. She found her angle and kept going, and the last 60 feet went fast, and then the ledge came up under her feet. Granite, wet, cold, real. And she unweighted the rope and turned, and there was Mia Tran. The girl was pressed against the back wall of the ledge with her knees drawn to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, and she was shaking so hard it was visible from 6 feet away. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket that had a rip across the left shoulder, and her face was streaked with dried tears and canyon mud. And when the beam of Emily's headlamp hit her, she flinched back hard, reflexive, the flinch of a child who'd been alone in the dark for 4 hours and had stopped expecting good things to come toward her. "Mia." Emily kept her voice low and steady and moved slowly, getting down to eye level on the wet granite. "My name is Emily. I'm a nurse, and I'm going to get you out of here." The girl stared at her. Her eyes went to the harness, the rope, the helmet, the headlamp, the kit on Emily's chest. "Where's my dad?" she said. Her voice was smaller than Emily was prepared for. "He's safe. He's at the hospital. He's been asking about you." Emily closed the distance between them at a pace that matched the girl's breathing, measured, unhurried, even though the water below them was 8 inches higher than it was an hour ago. "Can I take a look at you? I want to make sure you're not hurt before we go up." Mia looked at her for a long moment, assessing, the way kids assess when they've been through something scary and haven't decided yet whether the adult in front of them is trustworthy. Then she unfolded her arms from her knees. Emily had done pediatric assessments in controlled environments, in clean ICUs with overhead lighting and colleagues on standby. She had not done one on a wet rock ledge in a flooding canyon at night with a storm overhead and a haul line as her only exit. She did it anyway, hands moving efficiently,
checking responsiveness, checking the limbs, checking the torso under the jacket for signs of injury. Minor hypothermia, a bruised shin that was swelling and sore but intact. A small laceration on her left palm from where she'd grabbed the rock coming down. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but the hypothermia was going to get worse the longer they stayed. "Okay," Emily said. "I'm going to put this on you." She pulled the hypothermia blanket from the kit and wrapped it around Mia's shoulders, then began configuring the extraction harness that would allow her to clip the girl to her own body for the haul. "Have you ever been on a zip line?" "Once," Mia said. Small voice, but present. "This is like that, except we go up instead of across. You're going to hold on to me, okay? Arms around my neck. You don't let go. What if the wind—" "Then you hold tighter," Emily said. "Can you do that?" Mia looked at her hands. Emily looked at them too. Small, muddy, cold. The laceration on the left palm was still seeping slightly. "I'm scared," the girl said. Emily had heard that sentence a lot in her life, in various forms. In operating rooms, in the back of military aircraft, from grown men who'd been trained not to say it and said it anyway because there comes a point where training and reality stop negotiating. She had never come up with a version of the response that felt adequate, because adequate wasn't really what the sentence needed. "I know," she said. "Me too. We're going up anyway." She got Mia clipped and secured, checked every connection point twice, and keyed her earpiece. "Bull, we're ready for haul. Patient is stable, mild hypothermia, one lacerating wound, ambulating. She's secured to my harness." "Copy that." A pause. "Wind's picking up. Russo says there's a window in about 90 seconds, but after that the next one might not come for—" Then the earpiece crackled. Then it went silent. Emily pressed the button. "Bull." Nothing. She looked up. 200 feet of rope going straight up into the dark, the rim invisible from here, the canyon walls on either side of her close enough to touch. The sound of the water below was louder than it had been 8 minutes ago. She pressed the button again. "Bull, do you copy?" The earpiece gave her a sound that was either static or the wind or both, and nothing that was recognizably a human voice. Mia was looking at her face. Emily made sure her expression didn't change. She looked at the rope. It was still taut. Under load, the haul system was still rigged, nobody had pulled it. That meant the line was still good. That meant the system was intact. That meant the comms were the problem, not everything else. She could signal with the rope. 2 long pulls. She was on the ledge and stable. That was the prearranged signal. She reached up and pulled the rope, twice, long and deliberate, and felt the line transmit the pull upward into the dark. Then she waited. The rope didn't move. She pulled again. Below them, the water was rising, and somewhere far above her on the rim, something had gone wrong that she couldn't see and couldn't hear, and couldn't fix from the bottom of a flooded canyon with a hypothermic child clipped to her chest. She counted to 10. It wasn't panic management. She didn't have the luxury of panic management right now. It was just the most useful thing she could do in the first 10 seconds of a communications failure, while standing on a wet rock shelf 200 feet below the people who were supposed to be pulling her out. Counting gave her brain something to do while her hands checked the rope tension again, and her eyes went up the canyon wall looking for any sign of movement above her. The rope was still taut. That was the thing she kept coming back to. A taut rope meant the anchor was holding and the haul system was rigged and nobody on the rim had cut and run. It meant the problem was narrow. Comms only, not the whole operation. She pulled the rope again. 3 long pulls this time, deviating from the prearranged code, hoping that variation itself would read as urgent. Nothing. Mia hadn't spoken since Emily told her they were going up anyway. She was pressed against Emily's side with her arms locked around Emily's waist. Not around the neck the way they'd planned, because Mia had apparently decided proximity to the adult was more important than following instructions, which was fair, and she was shaking steadily in the hypothermia blanket. Her breathing was fast and shallow, the combination of cold and fear and a cardiovascular system that had been running on adrenaline for 4 hours and was starting to run low. "Talk to me," Emily said. "Not to Bull, to Mia."
The girl looked up. Her chin was tucked. "What's your favorite subject in school?" Emily asked. "What?" "School. Favorite subject." A beat. "Art," Mia said like it was a trick question. "Yeah? What kind?" "Drawing, mostly animals." She paused. "Why are we not moving?" "We're waiting for the right moment." Emily kept her voice level. "There are wind gusts up there. We go up when they're calm. My team is timing it." This was partially true, and Emily was keeping the other part of it, the part where she had no idea if her team could hear her or was responding to her signals. Behind her back, the way you keep a situation from a child, not to be dishonest, but because there was a specific calculus involved in how much fear a person could productively carry at a given moment, and Mia was already at capacity. She tried the earpiece again. Static, and underneath it something that might have been a voice and might have been the storm, and she couldn't tell which. The water below them was audible in a new way now, not just moving but churning, the sound of debris in the current, and when she clicked her headlamp down toward the canyon floor, the waterline was visibly higher than when she'd arrived. She didn't look at it long enough for Mia to follow her gaze. 8 minutes had passed since she'd landed on the ledge. She had, at the outside, 3 hours before the shelf went under. That was the math as of an hour ago. The storm had moved, which meant the math had changed. Emily reached up and grabbed the rope with both hands. Not the brake system, just the rope itself, and yanked it hard, not as a signal, but as a test of the anchor. The rope returned the pull with that specific resistance that meant the top end was fixed and loaded and not going anywhere. The system was still intact, which meant either Bull couldn't hear her signals, or he couldn't respond, or something on the rim had gone wrong enough to delay the haul without going wrong enough to drop the rope. She needed to work with what she had. She looked at the canyon wall. Her headlamp moved across the rock face above the ledge, reading the geometry the way she'd been trained to read terrain. Not aesthetically, not the way civilians looked at rock formations, but as a problem with variables. Width of the ledge, height of the wall above, crack systems, ledge sequences, the angle of the rock at the point where the wall met the shelf. There was a crack system running up the wall about 4 feet to the left of the rope. It was tight, maybe 2 inches wide, but it went straight and it went high, and from what she could see in the beam of her headlamp, it didn't pinch out in the first 30 or 40 feet. She was not going to free solo 200 feet of canyon wall with a child secured to her harness. That was not what she was looking at. But she was looking at whether there was a way to move laterally along the ledge to a point where the rope would be recentered over them, giving a haul line a better mechanical angle. If the reason for no response was that the haul system was jammed at the rim, a not impossible scenario in deteriorating weather, repositioning the load on the rope might free it. She moved left on the shelf, carefully, feet testing each placement, keeping Mia tucked against her. "Hold on," she said. "We're moving." "Is this bad?" Mia asked. "No, it's tactical." She used the word on purpose. Kids at 8 either took that kind of language seriously or got distracted by it, and either outcome was useful. Mia seemed to take it seriously. Her grip tightened. Emily moved to the new position, about 6 feet left of where they'd been, and felt the rope shift and re-angle above her. She pulled it again. 2 long pulls. This time, the rope moved. Not a haul, just a twitch, a slight upward displacement, like someone at the other end had finally gotten both hands on it and was establishing contact. Emily felt it in her palms and held very still. The rope twitched again. Once. She didn't know what that meant in their prearranged code because one twitch wasn't in the prearranged code, but it meant someone was up there, which was the only part that mattered. She pulled back twice more, steady, deliberate, and then she held on. Posho. What had happened on the rim took her 20 minutes and a full debrief to piece together, and she pieced it together later. Right now, all she experienced was the rope going taut above her in a new and purposeful way, and then the sensation of weight being taken off her feet as the haul system engaged, and then the slow vertical movement of leaving the granite shelf behind. "Hold on," she told Mia. "Arms around my neck, now." Mia moved from her waist to her neck the way they'd originally planned, and Emily felt the weight redistribute and shift her center of gravity slightly backward.
which she corrected by keeping her feet on the wall and walking upward in the short, controlled steps of an assisted ascent. The first 60 feet were manageable. The wind was coming in gusts, but nothing catastrophic, and the Hall team on the rim was moving them at a steady pace. Not fast, but consistent, the pace of a team that was working hard and hadn't broken rhythm. At the 120-foot mark, the storm found them. It didn't build. It arrived. 1 second the wind was a persistent annoyance. The next, it was a physical force coming from the northwest with the weight of the whole storm system behind it, and the canyon walls did exactly what Garrett had said they'd do. Funneled it, concentrated it, turned it into something that hit them sideways and spun the rope, and for 4 seconds Emily had no wall under her feet and no stable direction, and Mia was screaming, a pure high sound that cut through the wind, and Emily had both arms wrapped around the girl and was tucked over her, taking the swing on her own back. They hit the wall, left shoulder, same one as the descent. The impact drove the air out of her, and she registered the pain in a clinical way. Deep bruise, possible cracked rib, not disabling, file it, and got her feet back on the rock and pushed off and stopped the pendulum swing before it could build again. "I've got you," she said. It was aimed at Mia, but she was saying it to herself at the same volume. The Hall hadn't stopped. Up there in the dark, 12 men were pulling a rope, and they hadn't stopped. She got her feet back on the wall. She found her angle. She started walking again. The last 80 feet took 4 minutes because the wind didn't let up, and twice more she lost contact with the wall and had to recover, and each recovery cost time and cost something from her shoulder that she was not going to think about. Mia had stopped screaming and gone quiet in the way children go quiet when they've moved past fear into something that doesn't have a name. Just endurance, the animal decision to survive until the next thing. When the rim appeared above her, she didn't feel relief. She felt the physical presence of hands reaching over the edge and taking Mia's weight off her harness, and then more hands on her own harness, pulling, and the granite edge scraped her left shin as she came over and she was on the ground, flat on her back on the canyon rim with the storm wind blowing over her, and 4 different sets of hands unhooking things from her harness. She looked up at the sky. No stars, just cloud and the sweep of emergency lights. "Emily." Bull's face appeared above her. He looked, for the first time since she'd seen him in the bar, like a man who'd been scared and was trying not to look like a man who'd been scared. "You okay? Where's the girl?" "Dario's got her." He gestured somewhere to her left. She sat up before anyone told her to. Her shoulder protested with an eloquence that was hard to ignore, but she ignored it. She could see Dario across the lit area of the command post, crouching in front of Mia, who was sitting on a folded emergency blanket with a fresh hypothermia wrap around her shoulders, and was apparently telling him something with considerable emphasis. "Comms went out," Emily said. "Repeater unit on the rim took a hit from debris," Bull said. "Tree branch, maybe 30 pounds, came off the canyon wall in the wind. Took out the relay box. We lost your signal for 11 minutes. I know how long it was. Russo rigged a bypass, old school, direct wire to the Hall team's headsets. It took time." "I know." She watched Dario finish his assessment of Mia, watched the girl nod at something he said. "How did you know I'd repositioned on the ledge?" "We didn't. The rope angle changed, and Garrett said you'd moved to improve the load vector." Bull paused. "He said you probably figured out the Hall jam." "There was a Hall jam. One of the pulleys seized. Weather. We cleared it at the same time Russo got the bypass working." Emily processed this. 11 minutes of silence, a jammed pulley, a repeater unit destroyed by debris, and at the bottom of the canyon she hadn't known any of it. She'd made decisions with no information, and they'd happened to be the right ones, which was not the same as knowing they'd be right. That was the part nobody put in the debrief. That gap between the decision and the outcome, where you were operating on pattern recognition and training, and something that wasn't confidence exactly, but was what confidence left behind after you'd done hard things enough times. She got to her feet. Her shoulder sent her a detailed complaint, and she walked through it. The ambulance had been staged at the rim road, and Mia Tran went into it about 6 minutes after coming off the rope, wrapped in blankets and connected to a portable monitor that Dario had set up with the efficiency of someone who'd done field medicine in places that made this look gentle. Her core temp was down, but not dangerously. Mid-mild hypothermia, the kind that responded to warmth and fluids and time. Emily rode in the ambulance, not because she needed to, Dario was more than capable, but because Mia's hand had found hers when the gurney was loaded and hadn't let go. And there wasn't a version of Emily Carter who was going to be the person who removed their hand from a frightened 8-year-old's grip because it was technically optional. The girl fell asleep before they reached the highway. Emily sat beside the gurney with the girl's hand still loosely in hers and watched the monitor and felt the specific quality of exhaustion that wasn't about sleep, the kind that came from spending several hours under the kind of cognitive load that compressed time and burned everything non-essential. Her shoulder was developing into something she was going to need imaging for, probably. Her shin was cut and had bled into her sock. She had canyon grit in her hair and her scrubs were damp and she smelled like wet rock and fear sweat, which were actually very similar in the dark. She was thinking about the bar, about how she'd sat at the far end of it 3 hours ago trying to taste a burger and failing, and how Ethan Cole had put his fingers on her wrist like he had some right to inventory her damage. And she was thinking about how she'd made the choice in the parking lot that she was never supposed to have to make again, and how she'd made it without hesitating, which told her something about herself that she wasn't sure she was ready to sit with. The ambulance turned onto the highway. Phoenix's light pollution appeared on the southern horizon like a low orange bruise on the sky. Mia's hand twitched in hers, sleeping reflex not waking. Emily looked at the girl's face. Clean now, mostly. Dario had wiped the mud off before the blankets went on. And in sleep she looked startlingly young, which of course she was. 8. A kid who'd been drawing animals in her notebook probably that morning, who'd gone hiking with her father on a Tuesday afternoon, who'd had the entire world become very small and very cold and very dark through no fault of anyone in particular. Sometimes that was how it went. Emily had learned that early, and it had never stopped being hard to accommodate. Ridgeback Valley Hospital was a mid-sized facility with a clean emergency department and the look of a place that had been renovated recently enough that the paint was still true to color. Emily walked in through the ambulance bay with Dario and 2 paramedics and the gurney with Mia on it, and felt the particular spatial recognition of someone who understood hospital architecture without thinking about it, where the trauma bay would be, where the pediatric annex would branch off, where the overnight attending was probably standing. The pediatric on-call was a woman named Dr. Navarro, early 40s, short hair, the kind of unhurried manner that meant either deep competence or checked-out indifference, and it became clear quickly that it was the former. She took the handoff from Dario smoothly, asked 3 targeted questions, and had the full picture in under 90 seconds. "You the medic who went down?" she asked Emily, not looking up from Mia. "Nurse, Harbor Ridge ICU. "She's going to be fine." Navarro said it without the performative warmth that sometimes went with it, just a clinical assessment delivered as fact. "Mild hypothermia, superficial laceration, probable emotional trauma response over the next few weeks. Dad's 2 rooms down. He's been awake for the last hour asking about her every 15 minutes. He can see her? As soon as we get her warmed up, maybe 20 minutes. Emily nodded. She stepped back from the bay to give the team room and stood in the corridor, and for a moment she just stood there and did nothing. The fluorescent light in hospital corridors had a particular quality that was neither welcoming nor hostile, just continuous, and she'd spent enough of her life under it that it had become a kind of neutral background. Bull appeared at the end of the corridor. He'd come in his own vehicle. Behind him, at a distance that was clearly deliberate, 3 of the others, Garrett, Russo, and a man named Teller, who she'd barely spoken to, but who had the kind of rope work on his hands that told its own story. They'd followed the ambulance. Of course they had. Bull walked to where she was standing and stopped. "Navarro says she's going to be okay," Emily said. "I heard." He looked at her, at the shoulder she was holding slightly differently from the other one. "You need imaging." "Probably." "Not probably." "I'll go to Harbor Ridge when I get back." She looked at him. "What happened at the bar tonight? Cole? Does he know who you are? Who any of you are?" "He does now." Bull's expression was flat. "Russo had a conversation with him in the parking lot while Garrett and I were getting you on the rope." "What kind of conversation?"
The informational kind. Who you are, what you did, what the scars actually mean. He paused. He asked if you were the nurse from the Kelvin Ridge operation. Russo told him yes. Emily looked away, down the corridor toward the pediatric bay, where the sounds of clinical activity were doing their steady work. I didn't want that, she said. I know, but he put his hands on you in a public place and mocked your injuries in front of 20 witnesses, and the 12 of us were standing right there. Bull's voice was even, but underneath the evenness was something with an edge to it. Some things aren't really in your control once they're in motion. She didn't answer that because it was true. There's something else, Bull said. Something in his tone shifted slightly. Not to reluctance, Bull Hayes didn't do reluctance, but to the specific register of a man delivering information he knew was going to change something. What? She said. Dr. Alan Whitmore. You know him? Emily's stomach tightened before her brain had fully caught up to why. Alan Whitmore was the chief of medical operations at Harbor Ridge Medical Center. He was 57, silver-haired, and he had a particular way of sitting at the head of conference tables that communicated ownership of the room. He had also, over the course of the past 8 months, been the person signing off on Emily's performance reviews that had been, without any specific language that could be actionable, consistently and precisely designed to keep her from advancing. He's my CMO, she said carefully. He filed a report with the Arizona State Nursing Board 6 days ago. Bull said it the way he said most things, without theatrics, just the information laid flat. We only know because one of the men, Teller, his sister works in the board's administrative division. She mentioned it because she recognized the name from the operation. Kelvin Ridge got some internal circulation a few years back, not public, but within certain channels. Emily stared at him. What kind of report? Professional conduct complaint. Claims you've been practicing outside your scope, making unauthorized medication decisions, being insubordinate to attending physicians. Bull watched her face. The framing is that you're a liability risk, the kind of report that, if it moves forward, triggers a formal investigation. Emily said nothing. The corridor lights hummed. Somewhere in the pediatric bay, Mia Tran's monitor beeped with steady, regular patience. The timing, she said finally. Yeah. He filed it 6 days ago. I pushed back on an attending's orders last Tuesday. Wrong dosing on a cardiac patient. I flagged it. The attending got it corrected, and there was a conversation afterward where Whitmore told me I needed to understand the chain of command. And 7 days later, there's a formal complaint. She looked at her hands. The rope marks were still fresh across her palms, red lines over old scar tissue, and she looked at them the way she'd been looking at her hands all night without quite meaning to. He doesn't know where I am right now, she said. No, your charge nurse has been trying to reach you. I know, I'll call her. Emily, Bull waited until she looked at him. The complaint has a secondary piece. It references your military medical record. It makes a claim that your psychological evaluation on separation, the one done after Kelvin Ridge, indicates you have unresolved trauma responses that make you unfit for patient care. The corridor was very quiet for a moment. He pulled my separation psych eval, she said. He claims to have it. How he accessed a classified military medical document is its own question. Her jaw was tight. She could feel it. The specific tension in the back of her molars that was the physical address of the kind of anger that didn't have a productive outlet in the present moment. Whitmore had spent 8 months slowly and carefully constructing a professional case against her, and she had noticed the shape of it without being able to name it, because each individual piece had been small enough to be explained away. A critical performance note here. A passed-over commendation there. The reassignment of her to less complex cases framed as workload management. And now this. A formal complaint using her own psychological history as a weapon, built from a document he shouldn't have been able to access. When does the board review it? She asked. Teller's sister thinks it goes to a preliminary panel in 72 hours. 72 hours. She had 72 hours before a preliminary panel reviewed a complaint that had been assembled from a classified document, built by a man who had apparently decided that a nurse who caught a medication error and reported it was more trouble than she was worth. Why does he want you out? Bull asked.
Emily looked at him for a long moment. Because 3 months ago I found a discrepancy in the ICU medication dispensing log, she said. Off-schedule withdrawals on controlled substances. Small amounts, consistent pattern, going back at least 5 months. Bull was very still. I reported it to Pharmacy Oversight. Pharmacy Oversight referred it up. Whitmore told me the discrepancy had been reviewed and was a documentation error. She paused. But I kept a copy of the log. The silence between them had a weight to it now. Where is it? Bull asked. My apartment. External drive. She looked down the corridor. Which means it's been sitting there for 3 months while Whitmore built a case to end my career before I could do anything with it. Bull looked at her for a long moment. His expression did the thing it did, cataloging, assessing. The machinery of a man who had spent a career solving problems that didn't have clean solutions. We need to move fast, he said. We, she repeated. Yes. No hesitation in it. Emily looked at the pediatric bay, where the sounds had settled into the steady rhythm of a patient being stabilized, where in a few minutes a father with a broken leg was going to be wheeled in to see his daughter alive and warming up, and already apparently telling a medical professional something with considerable emphasis. She thought about the dispensing log on the external drive in her apartment. She thought about 72 hours and a preliminary panel, and Alan Whitmore sitting at the head of a table with a document he shouldn't have had, and a complaint he'd spent months constructing. She thought about Mia Tran's hand in hers on the gurney, and the feeling of the rope going taut, and the specific clarity that came when everything else fell away, and there was only the next thing. Okay, she said. We move tonight. She pulled out her phone to call the Harbor Ridge charge nurse, and the screen lit up with a notification she hadn't seen yet. A Harbor Ridge internal message system alert sent 40 minutes ago while she was still on a canyon wall with no signal. She opened it. It was from Alan Whitmore. Sent at 10:23 p.m. Nurse Carter, I've been informed that you left your shift without proper handoff and are currently unreachable. This constitutes a serious breach of professional protocol. Effective immediately, your access credentials to Harbor Ridge Medical Center are suspended pending review. You're not to report to the facility or access patient records until further notice. Human Resources will contact you within 24 hours. Emily read it twice. Then she showed it to Bull. He read it. His jaw moved slightly. He just locked you out, Bull said. Yes. While you were pulling a kid out of a canyon. Yes. She looked at the message again. The timestamp, 10:23 p.m. The canyon extraction had been completed at 10:51 p.m. Whitmore had suspended her credentials 28 minutes before she'd brought Mia Tran safely to the rim. And somewhere in her apartment, on an external drive in the second drawer of her desk, was a medication log that showed a pattern that wasn't a documentation error. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. Unknown number, Arizona area code. She answered it. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, measured, with the particular diction of someone who'd spent a long time in institutional settings. Is this Emily Carter? This is Special Agent Darnell Okafor, DEA Southwest Division. We've been trying to reach you for approximately 6 weeks. A pause. I think we need to talk about Harbor Ridge Medical Center. She stepped away from Bull and walked 6 feet down the corridor because she needed the separation, and she put the phone to her ear and said, How do you have this number? Harbor Ridge HR Directory, Okafor said. We've been monitoring the facility for several months. Your name came up in our review of internal complaint filings, specifically a pharmacy discrepancy report you submitted in April. A brief pause. You reported it through proper channels and it got buried. We know that. We've been trying to reach you through official channels, but someone at the facility has been, let's say, intercepting inquiries. Emily looked at the wall in front of her, plain beige, a framed poster about hand-washing technique, standard hospital corridor aesthetics. What do you need from me? She asked. You kept records. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. We need them, tonight if possible. Another pause, and she could hear something in the background. An office environment, keyboards, other voices. Ms. Carter, the pattern you identified in April is part of a larger picture that goes back almost 2 years. We have enough to move, but your documentation closes a gap in the chain of evidence that we haven't been able to close another way. She looked down the corridor at Bull, who was watching her with the particular stillness of a man who had learned that some conversations needed space and was giving her space without being asked. Alan Whitmore just suspended my credentials, she said. 30 minutes ago. A short silence on the other end. When did he send that? 10:23 tonight. He sent a similar notice to 2 other staff members in the last week. Both had filed internal reports related to the dispensing records. Okafor's voice was even, but something had sharpened in it. He's been using HR mechanisms to preemptively isolate anyone who could corroborate the records trail. The credential suspensions create a paper narrative that you're unreliable, then the board complaint reinforces it. He's been building the case against me for months, Emily said. Yes, and we've been watching him build it. There was something in the way he said it, not apologetic, just factual, that told her the DEA's timeline and her professional destruction had been running parallel to each other, and neither had known about the other until now. I know that's not... I understand what that means for you personally. We had to let the operation develop enough to be prosecutable. She absorbed this. The anger was there, but it was cold now, the kind that didn't need to go anywhere immediately, the kind that could wait. I'm not in Phoenix right now, she said. I'm at Ridgeback Valley Hospital. It'll take me close to an hour to get to my apartment. We can meet you there. I'll have 2 agents. One condition. What's that? A man named Marcus Hayes comes with me. Former Navy SEAL, current civilian. He goes in the room. A brief pause. Is he involved in the case? No, he's involved in making sure I don't do this alone at midnight in my apartment. She said it flat, not asking. Another pause. Shorter this time. Fine. Text this number when you're 20 minutes out. She ended the call and stood for a moment with the phone in her hand. Her shoulder was a steady, deep ache now, and her shin had dried blood in her sock, and she had been awake since before 5 in the morning, and it was past 11 at night, and she was about to drive an hour back to Phoenix to hand over evidence that could dismantle the man who had spent the better part of a year treating her like a problem to be managed. She walked back to Bull. DEA, she said. They want the drive tonight. Bull nodded, like this was information that made sense, like of course the night that had started with a bar and a corporal's bad manners had arrived here. I'll drive, he said. Shimmt. They made a stop first. Mia Tran's father was a man named Victor, 41, with the kind of face that showed everything. And right now it was showing what happened to a person when they'd spent 5 hours not knowing if their child was alive. He was in a hospital bed with his left leg immobilized and a bandage above his right ear, and when the pediatric nurse wheeled Mia in, he made a sound that Emily had heard in various forms over her career and never fully got used to. Mia climbed carefully onto the bed beside him, navigating around the leg immobilizer with the focused care of a child who had, in the past 5 hours, done a number of things that required paying attention, and tucked herself under his arm. Emily stood in the doorway. She wasn't going to go in. This wasn't her moment, and she knew it. But Victor looked up and saw her, and his expression did something complicated. The look of a man who wanted to say something adequate and understood that nothing adequate existed. She told me, he said, in the ambulance. She said the nurse came down on a rope. Emily said, she did great. She kept her head the whole time. She said you were scared too. Emily looked at Mia, who was watching her from under her father's arm with the particular solemn attention of a child filing away information. Yeah, Emily said. I was. Mia seemed to find this satisfactory. She tucked her chin down and closed her eyes, and that was the end of the conversation, and Emily stepped back from the doorway and left them alone. The drive back to Phoenix was 90 minutes, not 60, because the storm had pushed weather across the highway, and Bull drove with the kind of careful steadiness that wasn't timidity. He was capable of going fast, she knew that. She'd seen how he moved, but was a considered decision that getting pulled over or sliding off a wet highway served nobody. Garrett rode with them. The others dispersed, some to a motel near the hospital, some heading back to Phoenix by other routes. The operation, such as it had been, was concluding its tactical phase and entering something that required fewer bodies and more patience. Emily sat in the back with her head against the window and let herself be still for 20 minutes, which was the most she was going to allow. The shoulder had moved from deep ache to something more pointed and specific, and when she reached across her body to feel the joint, she found a tenderness at the acromial margin that suggested either a significant bone bruise or a partial separation. Garrett noticed her testing it. There's ibuprofen in the side door pocket. She found the bottle, took 4, and put it back. Your call on the medical, but you should get that imaged before the inflammation sets, he said. I will. Tonight. Garrett. Okay, he said. Went back to looking out the window. She thought about the dispensing log. She'd made a copy the same week she'd found the discrepancy. Not because she'd anticipated this exact sequence of events, but because she was someone who noticed patterns and made copies of patterns. A habit from a former life where the difference between having documentation and not having it could mean the difference between people coming home and people not coming home. The log showed 19 withdrawal events over a 5-month period. Controlled substances, primarily fentanyl and hydromorphone, pulled from the ICU dispensing units in quantities that were small enough individually to fall within plausible documentation error ranges, but that formed, in aggregate, a pattern that was unmistakable once you looked at it the right way. Consistent day-of-week clustering, consistent shift overlap windows, the kind of thing that happens when someone understands the dispensing system well enough to work the gaps. She'd identified 2 potential access windows from the log metadata. She'd put it in the report and submitted it, and Whitmore had told her it was a documentation error, and she'd let it sit for 3 months because she was a nurse at a hospital, not a law enforcement officer, and pushing past a CMO's determination on an internal report was the kind of thing that ended careers. Except it turned out her career had been ending anyway, just more slowly. She texted Okafor when they were 20 minutes from her apartment, as instructed, and got a single word back, coming. Pohend. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in central Phoenix that was fine without being anything in particular. Adequate parking, working elevator, a neighbor across the hall who kept plants outside the door, and played jazz at a volume that was exactly at the threshold of audible without being loud. She'd lived there for 2 years, and the walls were still the landlord's off-white because she'd never committed to being there long enough to justify paint. She let herself in and went directly to the desk in the second bedroom she used as a partial office. The external drive was where she'd left it, in the second drawer under a folder of pay stubs. Small, flat, gray, holding 5 months of evidence that Whitmore had apparently correctly identified as the thing most likely to destroy him and had therefore tried to destroy her first. She plugged it in and confirmed the files were intact. Then she unplugged it and held it in her hand for a moment. Bull was standing in the doorway of the room. "You okay?" he asked. 3 months, she said. "I've had this for 3 months, and I just sat on it because I didn't know what else to do with it. You reported it through the proper channel." And he buried it. "Yes, and the DEA picked it up anyway from a different angle." Bull's voice was even. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know I didn't do anything wrong." She looked at the drive. "I'm just noting that the correct thing and the effective thing weren't the same thing. I hate that that's still true. It's usually true." "I know." The doorbell. She never used the doorbell. She always got a knock. Rang, because Okafor apparently used doorbells. She went to the door. DEA Special Agent Darnell Okafor was 40-something, broad across the shoulders, and wore a jacket that had seen field work and hadn't fully recovered. He had the compact energy of someone who managed to be both unhurried and extremely focused, and he shook her hand once and meant it. His partner was a woman named Reyes, younger, with a precise quality about her that suggested she was the one who understood the documentation trail end to end. They set up at Emily's kitchen table. Reyes connected the drive to her laptop and worked through the files with the quiet efficiency of someone who already had a framework and was fitting new pieces into it. Okafor sat across from Emily and walked her through what he could share, which was enough of the picture that the parts she'd been looking at individually suddenly cohered into something much larger. Whitmore has been running a diversion operation through the ICU dispensing system for 22 months, Okafor said, keeping his voice low and even. The quantities are small per event, but the accumulated volume is significant. Street value, we're looking at close to $140,000. Emily absorbed this. Who's the buyer network? That part's been harder to nail down. He's been careful about the cash side, but the dispensing trail is solid. Your log fills the April to August window that we had incomplete data on. He would have known if a proper investigation started. The dispensing records would be pulled. Yes, which is why he needed the people who'd noticed the pattern discredited before any formal inquiry. Okafor looked at her directly. You were the most dangerous witness he had because you'd already documented it in writing and submitted it. The board complaint was designed to make anything you said about him look like retaliation from a nurse with a conduct history. Emily looked at her hands on the table. The rope marks were fading slightly, but the old scars underneath them hadn't gone anywhere. The psych eval he referenced in the complaint, she said. My military separation evaluation. How did he access that? Okafor glanced at Reyes. Something passed between them. We don't know yet. That document is classified at a level that shouldn't be accessible through any civilian HR pathway. His jaw tightened slightly. That's a secondary concern that may involve a different agency, but yes, accessing that document is its own federal issue. Reyes looked up from the laptop. The files are intact and the metadata is clean. Timestamps are native, no modification flags. She looked at Emily. This is solid. What happens now? Emily asked. We execute a search warrant on Whitmore's office and the Harbor Ridge dispensing system records first thing tomorrow morning. We've had the warrant language prepared for 3 weeks. Your drive fills the evidentiary gap that gets us across the threshold for the medical operations side of it. Okafor leaned back slightly. He'll be notified he's the subject of a federal investigation by noon tomorrow at the latest. And the board complaint? We'll contact the Arizona Nursing Board in the morning and flag the investigation. A federal DEA inquiry into the person who filed the complaint against you will trigger an automatic hold on the review process. Emily was quiet for a moment. He suspended my credentials tonight, she said, while I was pulling a child out of a flooding canyon. Okafor looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something in it acknowledged the specific ugliness of that. He was trying to establish a paper record that you'd abandoned your post, Okafor said. It would have strengthened the board complaint. He paused. What you were actually doing tonight, we're going to need a brief statement from you about your whereabouts for the timeline. The canyon rescue is publicly documented through the state emergency management system. Witnesses, Bull said from where he was standing against the wall. Okafor looked at him. 12 of them, you said. 12, Bull confirmed. That'll do. Okafor and Reyes left at 12:40 a.m. with the drive, a signed chain of custody form, and Emily's cell number. The apartment was quiet afterward in the specific way apartments are quiet when people have just left, the furniture all slightly too aware of the empty space. Bull sat down on the couch without being invited and without ceremony, the way people sit down when they've been on their feet for 6 hours and have stopped caring about formalities. Garrett had stayed in the SUV downstairs. Emily wasn't sure if that was tact or exhaustion or both, and didn't ask. You should sleep, Bull said. I'm not going to sleep. No, probably not. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. You know what happens tomorrow? Whitmore gets a search warrant served on his office. And your credentials suspension goes into a federal investigation file as evidence of obstruction. He glanced at her. That's not nothing. No. She pulled her legs up onto the chair across from him, the one she never sat in because she was never home long enough to have furniture preferences. When did you find out about the board complaint? Before or after you found me at the bar? After. Teller's sister called him about 2 hours before we walked in. He looked at her. We were already in Phoenix. We'd tracked your general location from... There are ways when you know people. We were going to find you regardless. But the complaint accelerated it. Yes. She thought about that. About 12 men who'd been looking for her for 2 years, who'd found her on a Tuesday night in a roadside bar by whatever combination of persistence and old network intelligence that kind of search involved, and who had arrived in time to watch a corporal put his hand on her wrist. Why 2 years, she said. Why did it take that long? Bull was quiet for a moment. Because you didn't want to be found, and we tried to respect that. His voice was straightforward, without apology or self-justification.
You separated from service, you moved, you changed your contact info. The message was pretty clear. So what changed? A man named Robert Voss, Bull said. He was the loadmaster on the Kelvin Ridge aircraft, the one you pulled out last. He died in March. Civilian accident, nothing connected. But before he died, he got in touch with me. He'd known what you were doing after service. He'd been keeping loose track. A pause. He told me about Harbor Ridge. He told me someone was making your life difficult there, and he didn't think you had anyone watching your back. Emily looked at the wall. Robert Voss had been 44 years old, a quiet man from Colorado with a daughter at university and a laugh that was too big for his face. She'd pulled him out of the aircraft third from last, with his left arm compromised and a chest wound that had been borderline. He'd made it. He'd spent what turned out to be the last 3 years of his life keeping loose track of her, and he'd made a phone call before he died. She didn't say anything about this because there was nothing to say that was proportionate. Okay, she said finally. It was the same word she'd said in the parking lot. It meant the same thing, not that everything was fine, but that she was moving forward anyway. She got up and went to the kitchen and made coffee she probably shouldn't drink this late, but the shoulder needed her awake for at least another 2 hours, and her body needed something to do with its hands. She stood at the counter while the machine ran and listened to the sound of the city outside the window. Phoenix at 1 in the morning, which was never fully quiet. Her phone lit up on the counter. Harbor Ridge Medical Center. Not the internal messaging system this time. The main number, which meant it was coming from a handset, not an automated system. She answered it. Emily. It was Karen Delacroix, the overnight charge nurse. Her voice had the quality of someone who'd been sitting on a decision for several hours and had finally made it. I know it's late. I know about the suspension message. Karen! Let me finish. A brief pause. The message he sent you tonight, I was in the building when he sent it. He came in at 10 p.m., which is unusual, and he went directly to HR. I don't know exactly what he did, but I know the timing. Her voice dropped slightly. I've been thinking about this for 3 months, ever since you flagged the dispensing discrepancy and he buried it. I pulled the logs myself afterward, Emily. I didn't know what to do with what I found. Emily gripped the phone. Karen, tell me you also made a copy. A silence that was almost a second too long. I have 17 pages, Karen said. Different date range from yours, I think. July through November. Emily closed her eyes. 17 pages. A date range that extended the pattern 3 months beyond her own documentation. Together they covered 8 months of a 22-month operation, and Okafor had said the other 14 months were already in the DEA's evidence file. You need to call a number, Emily said. She recited Okafor's cell from memory. Tell him you're calling about Harbor Ridge and that Karen Delacroix has documentation. He'll answer even at this hour. Are there people already involved? Yes. Tonight. It's moving. She paused. Karen, you've been sitting on this for 3 months and you didn't say anything. Neither did you, Karen said quietly. That was fair. It landed, and Emily let it land. Call Okafor, she said, tonight. She ended the call and stood at the counter with the coffee she'd made steaming in front of her. Bull appeared in the kitchen doorway, reading her expression. What? The charge nurse has a separate copy of the logs covering a different date range. Emily picked up the coffee. 8 months of documentation between the two of us, and the DEA already has the other 14. Bull's jaw moved slightly in that almost not a smile. He spent 8 months trying to destroy you, Bull said, and the whole time you and your charge nurse were both sitting on evidence. We didn't know about each other. He didn't know about either of you. Emily drank the coffee. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway. She thought about Whitmore at 10 p.m. walking into the HR office at Harbor Ridge to send a suspension notice to a nurse who was, at that exact moment, coming up a rope from the bottom of a flooded canyon. She thought about the board complaint, the classified psych eval he shouldn't have had, the months of performance reviews calibrated to erode her standing one careful increment at a time. He'd been thorough. She would give him that. He had planned it well and executed it methodically and had clearly considered most of the angles. He hadn't considered the angle where 12 men spent 2 years looking for her because of a loadmaster from Colorado who made a phone call before he died. He hadn't considered Bull Hayes walking into the Anchor on a Tuesday night. He hadn't considered that the woman he was trying to make disappear had 6 years ago, in a burning aircraft in a province most people couldn't locate on a map, made a decision that left enough of a mark on enough people that those people never quite stopped paying attention. Her phone lit up again. Different number this time. She almost let it go, and then she looked at it more carefully. The area code was Washington, D.C. She answered, "Is this Emily Carter?" The voice was female, precise, and carried the specific diction of someone who worked in federal oversight and had been doing it long enough that phone calls at 1 a.m. no longer registered as unusual. "Yes," Emily said. "My name is Director Sandra Falk, Office of Inspector General, Department of Defense Medical Division." A brief pause. "We've been made aware, through interagency communication in the last 2 hours, that your name has come up in connection with a DEA investigation in Phoenix." "That's correct." "We've also been made aware that a classified document from your military separation file was accessed by a civilian hospital administrator without authorization." Emily didn't say anything. "Ms. Carter, the document that was accessed, your post-operational psychological evaluation from the Kelvin Ridge operation, is classified at a level that requires specific DOD authorization to view. The investigation into how Dr. Whitmore obtained that document is now a separate matter being handled by our office." Another pause. "But I'm also calling because your file came across my desk tonight for the first time, and I read it." Emily waited. "The evaluation that Whitmore cited in his complaint against you," Director Falk said, and her voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, but different in a way that was hard to name. "The one that supposedly indicates unresolved trauma responses that make you unfit for patient care." "Yes, that is not what it says." Falk's voice was flat and precise. "What it actually says, and I'm reading directly from the document, is that the subject demonstrates exceptional psychological resilience under extreme operational stress, with integration of traumatic experience consistent with long-term adaptive function. The evaluating clinician's final recommendation was unrestricted return to any professional capacity of the subject's choosing." The kitchen was very quiet. "He misrepresented it," Emily said. "He didn't misrepresent it. He fabricated a summary of it." Falk let that sit for exactly 1 second, which, in addition to the unauthorized access charge, constitutes a federal offense under statutes governing the falsification of military medical records. Emily put her hand flat on the counter. She needed to feel the solidity of the surface. "Ms. Carter," Falk said, "I want to be transparent with you. By the time the business day begins tomorrow, Dr. Alan Whitmore is going to be dealing with inquiries from the DEA, the Arizona Nursing Board, on your behalf, not his, the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, and based on a call I made 20 minutes ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona." Bull was in the doorway watching her face. "I understand," Emily said. "I also want you to know that your separation evaluation has been added to your official HR file in a corrected form. The falsified summary Whitmore was circulating has been flagged and will be challenged in any proceeding where it appears." A brief pause. "Is there anything you need from this office tonight?" Emily thought about the question. "My credentials at Harbor Ridge," she said. "The suspension. The hospital's legal counsel will receive a letter from this office when they open tomorrow morning. The suspension will not survive the day." Falk's voice was even. "You'll be able to go back to work." Emily looked at the coffee in her hand, looked at the kitchen, the off-white walls, the counter she'd been standing at for 20 minutes while the world reorganized itself. "Thank you," she said. She ended the call. Bull was still in the doorway. He'd heard enough of it. The apartment was small and the night was quiet, and his expression had the quality of a man who had watched a situation move from very bad to something else and was taking a moment to let that register. Emily set the phone down on the counter. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "Alan Whitmore is going to walk into Harbor Ridge and find federal agents in his office." "Yes," Bull said. "He doesn't know that yet." "No, he thinks he just ended your career." She picked the coffee up again. Her hand was steady. The shoulder ached, the shin ached, and she'd been awake for 21 hours.
And across the city, a man was probably sleeping in reasonable comfort under the assumption that the nurse he'd spent 8 months methodically destroying had finally been destroyed. "There's something I need to tell you," Bull said. She looked at him. His expression had changed slightly. Not to reluctance, but to the register she'd started to recognize, information that was going to alter something. "Teller made some calls tonight," he said, after Okafor left. "He has contacts in the Phoenix PD. He wanted to know if there was anything on Ethan Cole, the corporal from the bar." Emily frowned. "Why?" "Because what Cole did tonight wasn't just a bad night at a bar." Bull's voice was even. Teller's contact pulled his record. Cole has 2 prior complaints from female veterans at VA facilities in the last 18 months. Harassment, physical contact without consent. Both were filed, both were reviewed, and both were closed without disciplinary action. Emily stared at him. "He's done this before," she said. "The pattern suggests yes. Tonight wasn't an impulse. It was habit." Bull looked at her carefully. "The difference tonight was witnesses. 12 of them, plus the bartender, and maybe 15 other people in that bar. And this time the woman he targeted has a military record that the complaints office is going to have a very hard time setting aside." Emily set the coffee down. She thought about Cole in the bar, the deliberate quality of it, the practiced ease with which he'd moved toward her, the way he'd touched her wrist not as a single impulsive act, but as the action of someone who'd done it before and found that it worked. She'd read it in the moment as entitlement. What Bull was telling her was that it was something more systematic than that. "Teller filed a formal third-party witness report with the Phoenix PD tonight," Bull said. "All 12 of us are on it. The bartender's been contacted. There's a case number." Emily looked at the wall, the off-white paint, the nothing on it. She'd walked into the Anchor to eat a burger and not go home to an empty apartment, and instead she'd pulled a child out of a flooding canyon, handed over evidence that was going to bring down her CMO, received a call from the DOD Inspector General's office, and become the complainant in a misconduct case against a Marine corporal who'd apparently been doing this long enough to think he'd never run out of women who wouldn't have 12 former Navy SEALs materialize at the critical moment. "I need to sleep," she said. "Yes," Bull said. "I'm not going to," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him, at the face she'd last seen in firelight with her hands on his femoral artery, which was now, 6 years later, sitting across from her in her kitchen in Phoenix at 1:30 in the morning. "Robert Voss called you," she said. "Yes. Before he died. 2 weeks before." She nodded. She wasn't going to say what she was thinking about that because it was too large for the kitchen and too late at night, and she was too tired, and some things didn't need to be converted into words to be understood. "Get some sleep," she said. "Couch. There are blankets in the hall closet." She went to the bathroom and washed the canyon grit out of her hair and changed into clean clothes and wrapped her shoulder in a compression bandage that was going to have to do until morning. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her phone. One new message. Unknown number, different from Okafor, different from Falk. Arizona area code, but not one she recognized. She opened it. "This is Ethan Cole. I got your number from the duty sheet at the base liaison office. I know how that sounds. I know what I did tonight was wrong. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what I was doing." She stopped reading. Started again. "I talked to the men you came in with. I know who you are, and I know what you did in Haska Province, and I know what the scars mean. I don't have a version of tonight that makes me look okay, and I'm not trying to find one. I know there's a police report. I'm not going to fight it. Whatever the outcome is, I'm not going to fight it." She read it a third time. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay back on the bed with the ceiling of her apartment above her and the city outside the window and the knowledge that in 6 hours something was going to happen in Alan Whitmore's office that he had no idea was coming, and that in some number of days or weeks, a Marine corporal's prior pattern of conduct was going to go into a file that would follow him in ways that the previous 2 complaints hadn't. She closed her eyes. And then her phone buzzed again. And this time, when she looked at the screen, it was a number she recognized instantly because it was the main line of a specific office she'd had reason to look up 2 months ago and had never called and had stored anyway, in the way she stored things she thought she might eventually need. It was the direct line of the commanding officer of Ethan Cole's unit.
The call was coming from the base at 11 minutes past 2 in the morning, and someone on the other end was waiting for her to pick up. She answered it. "Carter?" she said. Old habit. She'd stopped introducing herself by last name only about 8 months into civilian life, and it had come back on its own just now without her deciding to let it. "Ms. Carter." The voice was male, mid-50s, and had the specific weight of someone who held rank and had been doing it long enough that it wasn't about authority anymore. It was just how they existed. "This is Colonel Raymond Scheck, commanding officer, 3rd Marine Battalion, Phoenix Liaison Station. I apologize for the hour." "It's fine. I'll be direct. I received a call approximately 40 minutes ago from one of my senior NCOs regarding an incident at a civilian establishment this evening involving Corporal Cole." A pause. "I've since been briefed by 3 additional sources, including a contact at the DEA Southwest Field Office, and in the last 15 minutes, an office within the DoD that I won't specify over an unsecured line." Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she was very still. "I'm aware of the witness report filed by the 12 civilian men," Scheck continued. "I'm also aware of the prior complaints in Cole's record, which should have been escalated the second time and were not, and that failure is on this command, not on the women who filed them." He said it without softening it, which she respected. "I'm calling because I want you to hear directly from me, before the business day begins and this enters formal channels, that Corporal Cole will be placed on restricted duty at 0600. A formal military disciplinary inquiry opened simultaneously. The prior complaints will be reopened and consolidated with tonight's incident report." "And the outcome?" she asked. "I won't prejudge the inquiry," Scheck said, "but I will tell you that I have read a summary of your service record tonight, Ms. Carter. And I will tell you that what Cole did in that bar was an insult to this uniform in addition to everything else it was. The inquiry will be thorough, and the outcome will reflect that." Emily absorbed this. "Is there anything you need from me or this command tonight?" he asked. "No," she said. "Thank you, Colonel." "Thank you for your service," he said. "The real kind." He ended the call. She sat with the phone in her hand for a while. The apartment was quiet, and down the hall she could hear the specific quality of silence that meant Bull Hayes was either asleep or pretending to be. And outside the window, Phoenix was doing its middle-of-the-night thing, where the traffic sounds dropped low enough that you could almost hear the desert underneath the city. She put the phone on the nightstand. She lay down without taking her clothes off, which was a decision she'd made many times in many circumstances, and looked at the ceiling and thought about the fact that she had, at various points in the last 18 hours, worked a double ICU shift, been mocked in a bar, met 12 men she hadn't seen in 6 years, rappelled into a flooded canyon, pulled a child off a rock shelf, handed evidence to a federal agent, received calls from 3 separate government entities, and was now lying in her apartment at 2:30 in the morning waiting for sleep that probably wasn't coming. She fell asleep in 12 minutes. She woke up at 6:47 to her phone and a shoulder that had not forgiven her for anything. The call was from Karen Delacroix, and Karen sounded like someone who had also not slept but had spent the night differently. Not resting, but moving, doing the thing Karen did when she decided to act, which was to act completely. "I talked to Okafor," Karen said. "He came to my apartment at 2 a.m. I gave him the pages." "Good." "Emily," her voice shifted. "There are federal agents in the parking garage right now. I can see them from the lobby, 3 cars. Emily sat up. "Is Whitmore there yet?" "His car pulled in 8 minutes ago. He doesn't know. He walked in like it was a regular morning." Emily looked at the ceiling. She thought about Alan Whitmore walking through the Harbor Ridge lobby at 7 a.m. with his badge and his silver hair and his particular way of taking up space in a room, and she thought about what he didn't know was waiting in his office. "Go do your job," Emily said. "Stay out of whatever happens in his office. Let it happen." "Are you coming in?" She looked at her shoulder, at the compression bandage she'd wrapped badly in the dark and would need to redo. She needed imaging. She needed actual food. She needed approximately 6 more hours of sleep and a conversation with her own brain about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. "Yes," she said. "Later. Not yet." She took Bull to get imaging done at an urgent care clinic that opened at 8.
because she'd been around enough to know that walking into an ER with a potentially separated shoulder was going to cost her 4 hours she didn't have. And urgent care would get her a portable X-ray and a radiologist read within 40 minutes. Bull sat in the waiting room and drank coffee from a machine that produced something technically coffee adjacent and didn't complain. The read came back at 8:52. Grade 1 AC, joint sprain with bone bruise, no fracture, no full separation. Painful and going to stay painful for 2 to 3 weeks, and she needed to keep it immobilized during the acute phase and then start physio, or it would stiffen in a way that would be its own problem. So not nothing, the urgent care physician said, but not surgical. Good, Emily said. He looked at the other scars on her arm while he was fitting the sling, and he didn't say anything about them, which she appreciated. Some people were professional about it, and some weren't, and today she was glad to have one of the former. She sent Okafor a text when she was back in the car. Drive delivered okay. Anything you need from me this morning? His reply came back in under 2 minutes. All good. Warrant executed at 07:30. Your presence not needed. Stay available by phone. She stared at that for a moment. Warrant executed at 07:30. Alan Whitmore had been in his office for approximately 23 minutes before federal agents arrived with a search warrant. She didn't have any particular feeling about that. Not satisfaction exactly, more the flat acknowledgement of a thing having happened that needed to happen. You okay? Bull asked from the driver's seat. The warrant went in at 7:30, she said. He nodded. Started the car. Dinged.